The night she found out, she was on her knees behind a filing cabinet, bleeding through her sleeve, counting cash she'd already counted 3 times because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. That was the night Voss decided to show up unannounced. She'd been working for Kellner and Associates for 11 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Not that she was counting. She just remembered numbers the way other people remembered faces, effortlessly, involuntarily, the way a scar remembers the knife. The firm was a ghost operation dressed in mahogany and glass on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Toronto that nobody ever looked at twice. That was the point. Ghost operations didn't want to be looked at. Her name was Petra Rowe, 29 years old, 5'4" on a good day, hired by a woman named Orla, who had worn expensive perfume and cheap shoes, and asked exactly one question during the interview. "Can you look at a set of numbers and tell me what's missing?" Petra had looked at the sample ledger they'd slid across the table and said, $42,611, and someone's been routing the remainder through a numbered company in the Caymans since March. She'd had the job before she finished the sentence. She'd told herself it was legitimate consulting. She'd told herself a lot of things in the first few weeks. By week 6, she'd stopped telling herself anything and just did the work, because the work was what she was good at, and being good at something, after years of being told she was good at nothing, felt like oxygen. She didn't ask who owned the firm. She didn't ask why the 3rd floor was always locked. She didn't ask why Orla sometimes came in at 3 in the morning and left receipts on her desk that didn't match any account Petra had access to. She just balanced the books until the night she found the second set. It had started with a discrepancy. A small one, $40, maybe $50. The kind of thing most accountants would round off and forget. But Petra didn't round things off. She followed the $40 down through 6 shell companies and 2 holding accounts, and 1 very clean wire transfer to a man named Drayden, who didn't exist in any database she could find. And then she kept going because she couldn't stop. She physically could not stop. It was like pulling a thread and realizing it was attached to the whole sweater. By 11:30 on a Tuesday night in February, she was alone in the office, the cleaning crew long gone, the heat turned down to something that hovered just above hostile, and she had the second set of books open on her screen. It wasn't consulting reviments, dates, amounts, initials, no names, no context, but she recognized the pattern. She'd seen it once before in a university seminar on financial crime, used as a hypothetical, the kind of hypothetical that made the professor pause and clear his throat before moving on. This wasn't hypothetical. This was a ledger of people, bought and sold. Her first thought wasn't "I need to run." Her first thought, embarrassingly, was "I need to verify this." So she printed it, all of it, 27 pages. And then she stood there in the dark next to the printer, pages warm in her hands, and thought, now what? She'd started to move toward the shredder when the door opened. She hadn't heard the elevator. She hadn't heard footsteps. She heard nothing until the door was already open, and the light from the corridor cut across the floor, and the man standing in the doorway was not the security guard she expected, not Orla, not anyone from the firm. He was tall, not ostentatiously tall, but the kind of tall that made a room adjust. Dark overcoat, open at the collar. He looked like someone who had stopped being tired a long time ago and had made a kind of peace with it. His hair was going silver at the temples. There was a scar along his jaw that had been there long enough to lose its color. His eyes moved across the room in a single practiced sweep, the door, the windows, the desk, the papers, and landed on her. She became very aware of the 27 pages in her hands. "Miss Rowe," he said, not a question. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't need volume. "The building closed at 9, she said, which was possibly the most useless thing she had ever said. He stepped inside, didn't bother closing the door behind him, which told her something, though she wasn't sure what. He crossed to the desk she'd been sitting at, looked at the screen, looked at the papers, looked at her. "You found it," he said. "I wasn't looking for it. You printed it." She looked down at the pages. There was nothing useful to say. He sat down in the chair across from her. Her chair, technically, and settled into it the way people settle into chairs they've sat in many times before. He looked at the far wall for a moment. Then he said, "How much do you understand of what you're looking at?" "Enough. How much is enough? Enough to know it's not consulting revenue." He was quiet. The building made its nighttime sounds, the ventilation, the distant city, a pipe somewhere. "My name is Voss," he said finally. "I own this building. I own the firm, through 2 intermediaries. The ledger you're holding is not mine. It belongs to a man named Corvin who has been using this address to process payments for the last 8 months without my knowledge." He looked at her steadily. "I came here tonight because someone sent me a message 3 hours ago, suggesting that my head accountant had discovered something she shouldn't have, and that she was planning to take it to the police." Petra's mouth went very dry. "I wasn't planning anything. You were standing next to the shredder. I hadn't decided yet." Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement, something older than amusement. "Corvin has people watching this building," he said. "They saw you print that document. If you walk out of here with it, they will take it from you. They will not be gentle about it." She looked at the door, still open, the hallway beyond it empty and orange-lit. "And if I give it to you," she said, "then you have information I need. And I have something you need. Which is what? A way out of this building that isn't through the front." She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. He didn't try to reassure her. He didn't smile. He just waited, the way someone waits when they already know the answer. "How do I know you're not Corvin's man?" she said. "You don't," he said. "But Corvin's men don't knock." She thought about that. She looked at the papers in her hands. She thought about the $40 that had started all of this, that small patient discrepancy that had led her here to this room at midnight with a stranger. She held out the papers. He took them without looking at them, folded them once, put them in his coat, stood up. "We're going down to the parking garage," he said. "There's a car waiting. We'll go somewhere and figure out what happens next." "I have a coat," she said. "Get it." The car was black and unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that nobody looked at twice. There was a driver, a large man named, apparently, Stern, who said nothing and drove the way people drive when getting from point A to point B is the only thing that matters. She sat in the back with Voss, 3 feet of leather seat between them, and watched the city go by outside. She'd grown up in Hamilton, which everyone in Toronto thought was funny until they'd actually been there, which most of them hadn't. She'd moved to the city at 22 with a diploma in accounting and a bag that wasn't full enough to warrant checking. She'd worked for a firm downtown that paid very little and expected everything, and then for a mid-size corporation that paid a little more and expected the same. And then she'd been let go during a restructuring. The polite word for what happens when a company decides the people doing the work cost more than the software that could do it instead. She'd taken the Kellner job because it was the only offer on the table. She'd told herself it was temporary. 11 months, 2 weeks, 4 days. "Where are we going?" Voss said. "You have a separate office. I have several offices. This one is not in a building that Corvin's people are watching." She nodded. Outside, the city was thinning, the bright core of downtown giving way to the darker, quieter streets of the East End. She watched a streetcar trundle past in the opposite direction, warm and orange inside, a handful of passengers who didn't know there was anything to know. "The ledger," she said. "The payments. You said you didn't know about it. I didn't, but it was running through your firm, through my address. There's a difference." He paused. "Corvin managed the introduction. I allowed him access to certain accounts as part of a separate arrangement. He used that access for his own purposes without my authorization." She looked at him. "You're angry." "I'm precise," he said. "Anger is imprecise." She almost said sure, the way she would have said it to anyone else, but something in the set of his jaw made her hold it back. "The document?" she said. "What are you going to do with it?" "Closer problem. Those are people in that ledger." He looked at her. The streetlights moved across his face in slow intervals. "I know," he said. "That's the problem I intend to close." His office was on the 3rd floor of a building that, from the outside, looked like a very boring insurance company, and from the inside looked like someone had taken a Victorian library and stripped it of everything soft. Dark wood, good light, a desk that had probably held secrets the same way old furniture holds dust. So thoroughly it had become part of the structure. There were 2 men in the hallway outside, who didn't introduce themselves and didn't need to. He sat behind the desk. She sat across from it, which put her in the position she'd been in earlier in reverse, which she noted because she noticed things like that. He'd poured her something, whiskey, Canadian, the good kind, and she'd accepted it because her hands were still not entirely steady and she needed something to hold. "Tell me what you found," he said, "from the beginning." So she did. She told him about the $40, about the thread, about the shell companies and the Cayman's account, and the initials that didn't correspond to any employee she'd ever encountered. She told him the pattern she recognized and why she recognized it. She told him about the university seminar and the professor who'd cleared his throat. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both about specific account numbers, and when she answered, he wrote nothing down, which meant he was either not taking her seriously or he was memorizing it, and from the look on his face it was the second one. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You've got a good mind," he said. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like an observation, the way he might note that a lock was well made. "I've been told it's inconvenient," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Almost." "In this context," he said, "it is. For Corvin, not for me. What happens to me now?" He looked at her steadily. "That depends on what you want." She hadn't expected that. She'd expected to be told. She'd spent most of her adult life being told what she was worth, what she could expect, what was reasonable for someone in her position. The question sat in the air between them like something unexpected. "I want to not be watched by Corvin's people," she said. "I want to not worry about what's on my hard drive. I want to know that the people in that ledger have someone looking for them." She stopped. "That's probably more than you were offering." "It's a starting point," he said. She looked at him. He was watching her the way she imagined he watched most things, with the patience of someone who had learned that most things eventually revealed themselves if you waited long enough. "You'd want something in return," she said. "I'd want you to continue doing what you do," he said. "Legitimately, under a different firm. The kind of work you just did tonight, finding what's hidden. There are people who would pay a great deal for that skill, and I am in a position to introduce you to them. And in exchange, you work for me exclusively for the next year. You report to me. You don't take outside clients. You want to own my books," she said flatly. "I want to leverage your talent," he said. "Those are different things." She thought about her apartment, the one in Leslieville, the one with the radiator that clicked all night, and the landlord who'd been promising to fix the bathroom tiles since October. She thought about her bank account, which was not quite a disaster, but was in the neighborhood of one. She thought about the $40 and the thread and where following it had led her. "I have conditions," she said. He waited. "I want to see the contracts first. All of them. Whatever I'm signing, I read it myself. I don't have a lawyer, but I can understand a contract. That's fair. I want to know what happened to the people in that ledger. Not a summary. Actual information when it's safe to share." A pause. "Agreed. And if I find something in your books, in anything I'm working on, something that's wrong, something you haven't told me about, I get to ask about it." He looked at her for a long time. The building was quiet around them. Somewhere outside, a streetcar passed, its bell faint and distant. "Yes," he said. "Okay," she said. She drank the rest of her whiskey. It was good. She hadn't had good whiskey in a very long time. She didn't go home that night. Voss's people. There were more of them than she'd expected, appearing at intervals the way people appear in a building that runs on its own quiet logic. Arranged a room for her in a place she was told was a hotel but had no signage anywhere visible. She was given a key and a bag with a change of clothes that turned out to fit exactly, which was either impressive or unsettling, probably both. She sat on the edge of the bed at 2 a.m. and looked at her hands. The cut on her arm, she'd caught it on the filing cabinet earlier, A clean slice that had bled more than it should have had been looked at by a man with a first aid kit who had cleaned it without being asked and said nothing. Not even this might sting, which she'd appreciated. It had been taped up with something that looked professional and probably cost more than her monthly transit pass. She thought about calling someone. She tried to think of who she'd call. Her mother was in Hamilton, which was complicated, and complicated was not what she needed at 2 a.m. She had colleagues at the firm, but they were colleagues, not friends. The way people are colleagues when they all work for a ghost operation without discussing it. She had a friend in Vancouver, Dex, who she texted sometimes, but Dex was 3 hours behind, and it wasn't that kind of friendship. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The $40. She kept coming back to it. $40 in the wrong column on a Tuesday afternoon, and she'd pulled the thread, and now she was here. She was always doing this, noticing what didn't fit, following it until she understood it, driving herself half mad in the small hours of the morning over a discrepancy that most people would have rounded off and forgotten. It's a gift, her professor had told her once, her second year, or a curse, depending on the job. She'd thought accounting would be safe. Numbers were honest, numbers didn't have agendas. You could rely on them to mean the same thing every time. And yet, she closed her eyes and listened to the building settle around her. This building with no sign and good whisk-ski, and men who appeared and disappeared without being called. She thought about Voss, the way he'd sat in her chair, the way he'd asked, "How much do you understand?" The way he'd folded the papers once and put them in his coat, as if the information in them was already accounted for, already entered into some private ledger of his own. She thought about his offer. Exclusively, 1 year. Report to me. She thought about the alternative, which was walking out of this building at 2 a.m. into a city where Corvin's people were watching, with nothing but her transit card and her accounting brain and a taped-up cut on her arm. The ceiling was a neutral color. The sheets were expensive. The radiator did not click. She thought she would lie awake all night. She was asleep in 6 minutes. Morning arrived the way mornings arrived in February in Toronto, reluctantly, grey, as if it were doing everyone a favor by showing up at all. She woke to light coming through curtains she didn't remember closing, and a tray outside her door with coffee, and a croissant that was warm enough to have been brought recently by someone who had not knocked. She ate standing at the window, looking out at a street she didn't recognize. Somewhere in the East End, she thought. The light had a quality that said east, and the street had the particular mix of old brick and new glass that meant money had arrived recently, but hadn't fully settled yet. A text on her phone, a different phone, she realized, her own phone gone and replaced with a model that was newer than anything she'd owned, from a number she didn't recognize. Meeting at 10. She looked at the time. It was 8:47. She showered, dressed in the clothes that fit exactly, and took the stairs. There were 3 people in the room when she arrived, not including Voss. 2 she didn't recognize. One a man in his 50s who had the look of a retired attorney, which, in her experience, meant he was not retired and possibly not an attorney, and one a woman about her own age with the kind of posture that comes from having stood in very serious rooms for a very long time. The third person she recognized as Stern, the driver, who was standing near the window looking out at the street. Voss was at the desk. Same desk, different light. He looked at her when she came in and then back at the papers in front of him. "Sit down, Miss Rowe," he said. She sat. She had her coffee. "This is Hallett," he said, indicating the man in his 50s. "He handles legal matters. This is Pryor, the woman, who handles operational matters. You'll be working with both of them." "Working on what?" "Specifically," she said. "Corvin's operation spans 4 provinces and has been running for 3 years, Voss said. He slid a document across the desk. "What I have here is the financial structure. What I need is someone to map it. Every account, every shell, every route the money takes from the source to the point of liquidation. The kind of map that can be handed to someone with authority to act on it." She looked at the document. Then she looked at him. "You're going to give it to the police?" "To someone with authority," he said, which was not the same thing, and she noted that. Why not just hand them your copy of the ledger, the one I gave you last night? Because a ledger of payments is a list of what happened. What I need is a map of how. A list can be disputed. A map of the financial structure is harder to argue with. She picked up the document. It was dense. Multiple pages, account numbers, dates, transfers. The kind of thing that would take most people weeks. She could see at least 2 patterns in the first 30 seconds that suggested where to start. How long do I have? She said. How long do you need? She thought. A week, maybe less. Something shifted in the room, not dramatically, just a small adjustment, the way air moves when something unexpected happens. Less, Voss said. Less, she confirmed. She worked. This was the thing about Petra Rowe. She worked the way some people ran or prayed or drank, not as a means to an end, but as the thing itself. The numbers settled around her like a language she'd been born speaking, and inside them she could see the shape of what Corvin had built. The elegant, awful architecture of it, the shell inside the shell inside the shell, the accounts that existed for 7 days and then closed, the names that never repeated, the codes that cycled on a schedule she identified on the 3rd hour of the first day. She worked at a desk they'd set up for her, the kind of desk that suggested someone had known she was coming before she'd agreed to come, which she noted and filed away. She had access to every account Voss controlled, which was extensive enough to be unsettling, and she moved through them with the careful focus of someone diffusing something she was not entirely sure of. Hallett appeared periodically with questions. Pryor came in once on the first afternoon, stood in the doorway for a moment and said, "Coffee?" which was the kind of question that meant something else, and Petra said yes, and Pryor nodded and left, and the coffee arrived without Pryor in it, which Petra respected. Voss came on the 2nd evening. She heard him before she saw him, the particular quality of his footsteps, which were quiet but not trying to be, the door handle turning with the certainty of someone who owned the door. She didn't look up from her screen. "Progress," he said. It was not a question. "The primary route goes through a property management company registered in Alberta," she said. "The company was incorporated by a man named Drayden, the one I found first, but Drayden is a fabrication, an identity assembled from 3 separate real people, born in the same year. The accounts are signed by the fabricated identity, and the signature is good enough to pass a basic check, but not a biometric one. I've traced 7 payments through this route in the past 6 months. She turned the screen toward him. He looked at it for a moment, long enough to take it in. "There's a secondary route," she said. "Domestic. Smaller amounts, more frequent. Those go through a catering company in Mississauga that files legitimate tax returns on a legitimate business, but the payroll doesn't match the number of employees and hasn't for 2 years. The discrepancy is," she checked her notes, $412,000 cumulative since the company was acquired. He looked at her. "Acquired by Corvin? Through a family trust that traces back to him through his wife's maiden name, yes." Another silence. The kind of silence that was doing work. "You found this in 2 days," he said. "The $40 discrepancy was the hard part," she said. "Once I understood the method, the rest of it was arithmetic." He sat in the chair across from her desk. He didn't do it with the entitled ease of someone who sat wherever he wanted. Or maybe he did, she couldn't tell anymore. She'd lost the ability to read that particular quality in him. "What do you need to finish it?" he said. "Access to the Mississauga company's payroll records, if you can get them. And I want to understand the Eastern accounts. There are payments going somewhere in the Maritimes that I haven't found the destination for yet. I'll get you the payroll records." "The Maritime accounts are," he paused. "Those are more complicated." She looked at him. "More complicated how?" "The destination is someone Corvin owes money to, someone I also know." She waited. "I'll brief you on that separately," he said. "Not tonight," she almost pushed. It would have been easy to push. She'd been pushing at things her whole life, pulling at threads, pressing on loose tiles. But there was something in the way he said "not tonight" that suggested it was not deflection. It was precision. He was telling her there was something, and he was telling her when she would learn it. That was more than most people gave her. "Okay," she said. He stood. He looked at the desk, the papers, the coffee cup, the 3 different colored pens she'd arranged by function without meaning to. "You should eat," he said. "I had the croissant this morning. It's 9:30 at night." She looked at the clock. She hadn't noticed. "There's food," he said. "Down the hall, second door." She nodded. He left. She sat for a moment in the quiet he'd left behind, in the particular quality of a room after he was gone from it, like the air took a moment to readjust. Then she saved her work, capped her pens, and went to find the food. The third day, a man came to the building who was not Corvin but was close enough to Corvin that the hallway outside her office filled briefly with people who were very quiet and very still, and then emptied again, and Pryor came in 20 minutes later and said, "We're moving you upstairs for a few hours." And Petra closed her laptop and went upstairs without asking why, because she understood by now that sometimes you moved without asking why, that this was part of the logic of this particular world. Upstairs turned out to be a sitting room with good windows and a view of the street, and Voss was already there, standing by the window in the way she'd begun to associate with him. Not restless, not anxious, just present, taking in information. She sat down. "Corvin's moving faster than expected," he said, without turning around. "Because of the ledger. Because someone told him the ledger had been found and wasn't recovered." He paused. "He doesn't know it was you. He thinks it was one of my people. Is that better or worse?" "It's what it is." He turned. "How close are you to having what I need? Maritime accounts are the last piece. If I have those," she considered, "another 4 hours, maybe 5. He nodded. He sat down across from her, the way he'd sat across from her that first night, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and she was aware of the street sounds coming through the glass. The city going about its February business below. "The maritime accounts," he said. "The person they lead to. His name is Rain. He financed Corvin's expansion into the eastern provinces in exchange for a percentage of the take. He's been protected because he has connections to people He stopped. People I have existing arrangements with. But what Corvin has been running isn't what Rain agreed to finance. Rain financed a protection operation. He didn't sanction what's in the ledger." She looked at him. "You've spoken to Rain. I spoke to him this morning, and he wants Corvin gone as much as I do. More." Voss's jaw tightened briefly enough that she almost missed it. "He has people in the ledger too. Family." She absorbed that. She thought about what that meant, that even in this world, with its shell companies and fabricated identities and payments that moved like water finding its level, the thing that finally broke an arrangement open was something that simple. Someone had taken something that wasn't supposed to be taken. Someone had hurt someone's family. "I'll get you the maritime accounts in an hour," he said. "Rain is sending them directly." "Okay." She looked at her hands, then at him. "After I finish the map, what happens to the ledger?" He looked at her steadily. "There's a journalist," he said, "at the Globe. She's been working a financial crime story for 2 years, and she's been stuck because she has the pattern but not the mechanism. We're going to give her the mechanism." Petra looked at him. "You're going to give a journalist a document that traces back to your firm." "To a firm I own through 2 intermediaries," he said. "Yes, that's..." She thought about it. "That's an elegant way to close it." "I have my moments," he said. And there it was again, that almost movement at the corner of his mouth, that thing that wasn't quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one, and she'd been watching for it without meaning to, she realized, the way she watched for discrepancies in a column of numbers. Not looking, exactly, but noticing when it appeared. She finished the map at 11:15 on the 4th night. She printed it, 41 pages, clean and annotated, every route traced, every account named, the whole structure laid out the way you'd lay out a building's floor plan, so that anyone who looked at it could see exactly how it was built and exactly where the walls could come down. She put it in a folder and walked down the hall to Voss's office and knocked once and went in. He was at the desk. There was someone on the phone, a voice she could hear but not make out, and he held up one finger. "Wait." And she waited, standing in the middle of the office, folder in hand. He finished the call, looked at her. She held out the folder. He took it, opened it, looked at the first page, then the second, then turned to the third in the particular way she'd learned meant he was actually reading, not scanning. He turned pages for a while. The office was quiet. The window behind him showed the city, its lights cold and precise in the February dark. He closed the folder. "This is complete," he said. "Yes, you said 5 hours. You took 4. The Rain accounts were clean," she said. "Rain keeps better records than Corvin." He set the folder on the desk. He looked at her, and the look was different from the ones she'd catalogued over the past 4 days. Not assessing, not calculating, not the careful observation of someone taking in useful information. It was something else. She wasn't entirely sure what to call it. She wasn't sure she'd had enough experience of it to name it. "You did this in 4 days," he said. "I did this with access to everything I needed," she said. "Most of the time people don't give me access to everything I need. Most of the time it's not in their interest." "No," she said. "It's not." A pause. "Sit down, Miss Rowe," he said. She sat. "The arrangement I proposed," he said. 1 year, exclusively, I remember. I want to change it." She looked at him. "To what?" "No fixed term. Ongoing. With a review clause. Either party can end it with 90 days' notice, for any reason, no questions." He paused. "And the rate I proposed was fair for a contract position. It's not fair for what you just did. I'd like to revise it upward." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the city did what the city did. Indifferent, complicated money moving through structures that most people would never see. "You understand," she said, "that if I'm working for you ongoing, I'm going to keep finding things." "I'm counting on it," he said. "I'm not going to stop finding things just because they're inconvenient." "I know that," he said. "That's what I'm paying for." She thought about the $40. About the thread, about where following it had led her, to this office, this desk, this folder of 41 pages that was going to unravel something it had taken 3 years to build. She thought about the radiator that clicked all night in Leslieville, and the landlord who never fixed the tile, and the restructuring that had taken her job, and the interview where the only question that mattered was whether she could see what was missing. 90 days, either party, she said. "Either party," he confirmed. "And I see every contract before I sign it, yes. And when you say you're going to close something, you tell me what that means. Actually tell me, not a summary." He held her gaze. "That I can't always do," he said. "There are things that would put you at greater risk if you knew them. I won't hide things from you carelessly, but I won't tell you everything." She thought about that. She thought about how unusual it was. Someone telling her clearly, precisely what they would and wouldn't do, without dressing it up in something easier to hear. "Okay," she said. "That's honest. I try to be precise," he said. "I know," she said. "I've noticed." He looked at her. Something moved across his face. That thing again, the almost smile. And this time it stayed a moment longer before it went. He extended his hand across the desk. She looked at it, then at him. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and when he let go the room was exactly as it had been. The same light and the same cold window and the same folder on the desk that was going to bring something apart, and yet it felt. She couldn't have explained this to anyone. She barely let herself think it. It felt slightly different from the room it had been when she walked in. She stood up, picked up her empty coffee cup. "I'll need a proper workspace," she said. "I can't work on a laptop indefinitely. I need 2 monitors and a standing desk option and access to financial databases that aren't going to ask me to log in every 40 minutes. "Done," he said. "And I'm keeping the phone," she said at the door. "It was always yours," he said. She nodded, walked out. She went back to her room, the room with the expensive sheets and the radiator that didn't click, and sat on the edge of the bed and held the new phone in her hands and looked at the city through the gap in the curtains. $40. She kept thinking about the $40. She wondered sometimes what would have happened if she'd rounded it off, the way anyone else would have. If she'd closed the file, gone home, heated something up, watched something she'd already seen because she was too tired to follow something new. If she'd let it go. She had never been able to let things go. It had cost her things. Jobs, easy mornings, the goodwill of people who preferred not to be seen too clearly. She'd always thought of it as the inconvenient thing about herself, the quality that made her difficult, the reason she ended up alone in an office at midnight, following numbers into places that other people had the sense to leave alone. But it had also led her here. To 41 pages that mattered, to a folder on a desk and a handshake that held more in it than most contracts she'd ever signed. To a man who said, "I try to be precise," as if precision were the only honest thing. She set the phone on the nightstand. Outside, the city was February quiet, its lights holding steady against the dark. And somewhere in it, a journalist at the Globe was sleeping without knowing what was coming to her desk in the morning. And somewhere in it, Corvin was making calculations that were about to be wrong. And somewhere in it, the people in the ledger were living whatever lives they still had, not knowing yet that $40 and a thread and a woman who couldn't stop following things had found the map of what had been done to them. She turned off the light. She thought she would lie awake. She didn't.